you need to rest. You're clearly unwell. You need to stop. And I just remember feeling so much relief that someone had given me the permission to stop. And I stopped and then very quickly had realised I was very unwell.
What happens to someone who is that invested in that life when it all comes crashing down?
How have you managed to walk away from that point until now?
Welcome to Make Visible, the podcast shining a light on complex chronic illness. I am your host, Emily Kate Stevens. Welcome back to Make Visible. And this week I have Jez back with me.
Hello.
Hi. And today we are going to be talking to Oonagh Cousins, who is a former professional athlete who was pre-selected for the British rowing team for the Olympics in 2020 before contracting long COVID and ME. Before we get into our conversation, I wanted to raise a point that was brought to my attention by one of our lovely listeners, Louise. She wrote after last week's episode to point out that a supplement that we'd been talking about, glycine, actually can cause insomnia in 5 to 15% of people. And she has the same effect with magnesium glycinate. And so I just wanted to put that here at the top of the episode and say, as with all of these things, there will be a different reaction in different people. And I wanted to point it out here, but I also wanted to thank all of our listeners who have fed back on our previous episodes, because it has been so nice just to hear people's opinions, hear what people are interested in, how some of what we've discussed has helped, and how people would like us to talk going forwards. So there's been a great response to you and I sitting here having a conversation. Yeah. How has the response been for you?
Very positive, actually, since the initial kickback on the EMDR one. Since then, especially the one with Professor Todd Davenport's.
Yeah. Incredible
response to that in terms of people saying how validating it was. Because again, we're starting to see some pretty good evidence that it seems to explain something that was previously inexplicable to so many medical professionals around the world. So when we start to get the science reflecting what we feel in our bodies, that feels, dare I say it, almost exciting. And I think people have responded, very positively to that.
Great. When we're having these conversations, these ones that we're trying to do more story-based, more of a personal take on them, I'm excited to try and bring this idea of sharing our voices within the community. So I do encourage all of our listeners to keep writing to us. Some people have emailed, some people have written it on the podcast apps. Because if we can make a difference to one person from someone's advice over here being shared on here or on the comments, I think it's huge. What we want to do with these episodes that are different people's stories is we are going to talk, Oonagh, about your life and your experiences. But more than that, it's about us being able to have conversations, and some of them might be difficult conversations, that are not regularly being put out there, about the impact that living with a chronic illness has on your mental health, on your social life, on your relationships. And that is where having this more personal interaction, I hope, will be helpful to people. And it's interesting, we might disagree on some things, but I'm quite excited about that, particularly in this current political climate, to be able to have diverse conversations and respectfully potentially disagree, but bring those questions, bring those conversations out here. So, Oonagh.
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here with you both.
Before we get into your long COVID and ME journey, which has progressed to you being a huge advocate within this space, can you tell Jez and I what it was like to have your life before? How you got to being selected to represent Britain for the Olympics? Tell us about that life.
Sure. It feels like a lifetime ago, but I will do my best. So I started rowing at university. I started the sport quite late in life, but that's quite common with rowing. It's one of the few sports you can start later and get to quite a high level. And I kind of had a natural talent for it. I'm very tall. I was sporty as a kid and I took to it. I wouldn't have admitted this, but quite quickly it became my goal to compete internationally and be on the GB rowing team. And then after uni, when I was graduating, I was like, okay, I have to make a decision. Do I want to go and do normal stuff or do I pursue rowing? And I knew that what I wanted to do was row. And so I moved to London and I trained at the University of London Boat Club, which is one of these boat clubs that is very focused on getting people into the GB rowing team. I'd done under 23s at the end of university and had really got a taste for what being a professional athlete was. We trained 3 times a day and everything was catered around being as fast as you could be. And so I went to University of London Boat Club, very focused on basically getting good enough to get into the team. My rowing career was a bit odd in the sense that I got scouted by the British rowing team and I was supported to develop, got funding quite early, and I had access to physios and stuff. And it made for quite a bizarre rowing career. And that's part of the reason what happened was quite so brutal. I was very much accelerated a bit beyond my technical ability. I was often put in boats that were better than I was.
But you had the strength.
Because I had the strength, right? But it was very interesting psychologically because on the one hand, I had this support from the system. But on the other hand, I often felt very out of my depth. And I was put into the GB rowing team, the senior team, and I felt so out of my depth. I hadn't raced that much. I didn't have this roster of results. And I was super conscious of that. But I was like, year on year, my technical ability was improving rapidly. And so GB rowing team is like, well, we'll get her in the team and we'll train her up. And in my defense, that's what happened. So once I got into the team, I got in February 2019, and then this Olympic season started in September 2019, so it works like a school year. And I remember the day before I was starting this season, I was like, what am I doing here? I've never been to a World Championships. I haven't got any results from the World Cups, which is what happens in the non-Olympic years. But I'd spent my whole rowing career feeling really out of my depth. And so actually, I was very well prepared. The way I approached it was just being incredibly present. And I know how to get up and do a weight session. I know how to recover properly. I know how to eat properly. I know how to organise my life so that I can be the best I can be every day. And I just do each session, each stroke, each weight lift, each rowing stroke.
Almost just taking it everything one step at a time.
Yeah, absolutely one step at a time. And this is very applicable for long COVID as well.
Yeah, exactly.
I think sport is incredibly good for preparing you for chronic illness, actually. So you do like the kind of testing and seat racing. I trained that muscle in me. Your brain is also a muscle. I trained that psychology so well that even though I was seat racing, which a seat racing is when you run 2 4 side by side and you switch people. So you run the race and then you switch 2 people and then you run it again so you can clearly see who's making the boat move faster. Incredibly intense experience. Probably one of the most stressful things I've experienced. The Olympic selection was on the line, but I remember being so in the zone of I just have to go from A to B here. And it worked. I produced those results that I hadn't ever produced previously in that kind of environment, accumulated in this one great season.
And how did that feel? Being pre-selected for the Olympics, if you had made that your goal, how did that feel?
It's quite hard to put into words, but I do remember quite viscerally. There was this one time we had done this testing in November. Selection hadn't been decided, but up until that point, I'd been out of the boat, right? Because there's a ranking and you know where you are and you know that I knew that I was out of selection. And we had this week of testing and we did pairs testing, where you race in pairs, you do erg tests and then you do seat racing. And I won my seat race and I had a series of results that meant I'd put myself in the mix. And it wasn't decided yet because there was still more testing. But I just remember driving home on the M4, I had Beyonce on loud. And I'd just like streams of tears because my whole world, it was like a gear shift. And I'd gone from hoping that I might one day be good enough to being like, oh my God, I am good enough. Because you have to convince yourself that you could be good enough. But it's really hard to properly believe it. I've now put myself in with the athletes who are good enough to go to the Olympic. How did this happen? You know, I was just driving home to make dinner, incredibly normal, but my whole world had just lifted on its axis because it was such a big deal for me.
And so You would say at that point, rowing was your life.
Yes, it was. I get very invested in things. I can be quite single-minded. And I just loved it. I really loved it. It was very important to me to do it for the right reasons. I loved being an athlete. I loved the day-to-day. I loved getting better at things. And it's such a privilege to do everything in your power to be really good at something. There are some major negatives to being an athlete, and I have since realised that more since stopping. But at the time, it's such a fun thing to do. It's such a fun thing to do. You're being paid to do sport and try to be really good at something.
So what happens to someone who is that invested in that life when it all comes crashing down?
Can I just put B question in there
Go
at the
on.
same time?
Please do.
Which is, I'm assuming that lots of your other rowing club colleagues all got COVID at the same time. Yeah. Did any of them too go through a ropey period immediately afterwards? And was there a sense amongst the whole team of how to come back from this? And where did you fit into that?
So yes, COVID ripped through the training centre. And it was right at the time we were doing our final Olympic testing. So everyone was still training with it because most of the time when you're an athlete, you stop when you get sick. But it was our final Olympic testing. So that's the one time you don't stop. It was a real mix. Some people did get better very quickly in the 2 weeks period. Other people, a very good friend of mine, she got long COVID, not as badly as I did. She had it for a few months. First, it was realising it was COVID because none of us were that sick at the beginning. Our initial infections
and it was
weren't
very
that
early.
And it was very early. We didn't know what it was. Yeah,
you couldn't test either at that
point.
point.
No, you couldn't test, exactly. And I think there was maybe 5 of us out of a team of 70 that got some form of long COVID. And I got it by far the worst. Most people got better after a month. And a big reason I think I got it the worst is that I was new to the team and the training load, I was totally in the bin. I was overtrained, basically. So my body was just so run down, which I think is quite a common tale with people with long COVID.
Yeah,
They got
Jess
it.
and I have talked about that, about how you've been pushing so hard in various aspects of your life.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
That it's almost like it leaves a hole for...
Yes. So I was super susceptible. I couldn't have really got a virus at a worse time, to be honest. I was totally exhausted.
But how long did it take you to realise that you weren't coming back from that virus that other people were coming back from?
Yeah, so I imagine quite similar to you guys. I really went through that. I needed one more week, I need another week, and I think I'm getting better. I tried to exercise, still feel really sick, rest some more. Also, it's that blur of the first lockdowns where you don't have a routine, you don't have a schedule. You're like, am I depressed? Can't see a doctor in real life. Speaking to doctors on the phone. And I also think, actually looking back, I do think my illness took a few months to really bed in the sense that there were some times when I was able to do more in those first few months when I didn't get PM immediately. So that really confused things. I can do a 60-minute bike gently on this day, but I feel horrific for doing it a week later. So that first few months was just a total blur. I also think I had such bad brain fog and cognitive issues that I just couldn't really figure out what was going on. Do you know what I mean?
Was that your experience too? That because we didn't really know at the time. Obviously, if you were someone who knew about ME, that's one thing. But most of us didn't really understand post-viral consequences.
A little bit like Oonagh, I was peak physical fitness.
Yeah.
I was in the final month of training for the London Marathon. I was going for a time I hadn't gone before, so I was aiming for 2:49. I was super fit, a little bit like you driving home. One of my last memories before catching COVID, I was on my way back from LA. I'd been out there marathon training for a month. I was driving back. The sun was setting. The palm trees are all there. The Weekend and Blinding Lights had just come out, that song. And I was driving to the airport. And I just thought, I had my window down and I was just really happy. 5 days later, my life would change. And I didn't know that. But I was still in this mindset of I have to stay fit. And so I went back to running probably 10 days after first symptom. And again, sometimes it would be okay. And then over the first 3 or 4 weeks, I was trying to keep my heart rate down. But even keep my heart rate down, because I knew I shouldn't push too hard, I was getting faster and faster. And I was like, yes, okay, I'm getting over this. And then suddenly, bang, it just, after about a month, it really just hit me like a train. And that was when I went, I've maybe got to stop running now. And I will look back, and maybe you think the same thing. How different would your course of illness have been if you just stopped straight away?
Yeah, I didn't push it. I tried bits of exercise. I always did it very gently. I don't think I really pushed trying to get back into training. I didn't do that much training in those 3 months, but I didn't know how I was either. It was just a total blur. And then what happened was lockdown ended. and we were returning to the National Training Centre. Everyone was coming back in person. And I tried to string a few sessions together. I tried to do 3 sessions over 3 days or something. Very gentle sessions, heart rate low, etc. And I crashed really badly. Our GB rowing doctor called me in, and I didn't know at the time, but Anne, the doctor, had gotten on that I was long-term sick and I had a post-viral thing. And yeah, she was like, Tokyo's not on the cards.
So interesting. So someone from the outside identified that without you going and approaching and butting your head against 16,000 doors with people telling you, no, you're fine.
Yes.
Someone, because of the arena in which you were
100%.
working and people monitoring your physical fitness.
Yes.
You were pulled.
Oh, 100%. This is one of the things that really helps an athlete is there's no middle ground. You can't exercise when you're sick, right? You can try, but very quickly it's obvious that it's not working. And I had black and white data. I sit on the erg and my scores were horrific. I was clearly sick. Anne didn't need to know exactly what it was, but she knew I was unwell and she knew I shouldn't be training. That was very obvious.
You've spoken before, you and I have certainly had a conversation, but you've talked about it in the media before. The way in which athletes are taught to rest, there's a very different approach as an athlete to a normal human being.
Yes.
Talk to us about...
So this is one of the many ways I think being an athlete helps you with chronic illness, is that in high-performance environments, rest is valued. So when you train, exercise is only one half of the picture, right? Exercise puts stress on your body and it's in recovery that you get stronger. And so our coaches used to tell us to recover hard. That meant being disciplined about not going out and socializing, not going for a long walk with the dog. You should be on the sofa, you should be refueling, and you should be even kind of cognitive stimulation. You shouldn't really be working. They understood all of that comes from the same energy pool. And that was valued, that was respected, that was being seen as disciplined and focused and professional. And so that was a totally part of my life, was really valuing rest. And then also when you got sick, you rested, because if you exercised through sickness, you just extended the illness and you spent more time out of training. So within reason, like, it's not a perfect system. When you're doing that much training, we were training 16 times a week. If you are a bit run down with illness, if you start to train, you just put your body in a hole. So first signs of illness, you stop. I know I tried to train when I was still sick, but that is the general psyche. That's the mindset, really valuing rest. Yeah.
But one of the things is that at the time you are being paid, sponsored to train. You're being paid by the British Rowing
National
Association.
Lottery, yeah.
So then when you have to stop, were you still being paid? Were you still able... Which is a huge thing,
Massive.
because they value your health in that way. They're investing in you getting well, which for someone like me as a freelancer,
yeah, totally,
zero support.
Yeah, totally.
Is that
same with me? Yeah.
Yeah. And as a freelancer who was earning over a certain threshold, zero support from the government subsequently.
Yeah, you get put into the medical stream. And they'll pay you for like a year or two. I can't remember the exact length of time, but I had private health insurance and they didn't know what was wrong with me, but I was given the space to do what I needed to do.
Yeah.
And also, and I actually struggle with this now more because this is not the goal, but I knew I wanted to get back to 100% recovery because that was the only way I was going to be able to go back to rowing. So once that decision around Tokyo was made and I realised that was not on the cards, I aggressively rested. I don't think I triggered PEM more than 5 times in a year. She knew 8-9 months ahead and knew that I was properly sick, which I think was very good insight. I don't fully understand how she worked it out, actually, because I didn't have clarity of mind of actually how sick I was. It was only once that decision was made and I was like, oh, I actually only have like 4 hours in the day where I can do like basic stuff without triggering PEM. I was still really sick at that point. And she had figured that out,
but
and
this
I hadn't
is
conveyed it. Yeah.
Fascinating in itself that you are having your whole body monitored by professionals, and yet I guess you were also still pushing yourself, and yet you got to such an extreme level of sickness that actually reached that threshold to be diagnosed with ME.
I was never diagnosed with the ME. That's a kind
But you
of
fulfilled the criteria.
I had post-exertional malaise and the other diagnostic criteria.
Yeah, 4 hours a day that you were able to do anything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
PM was my dominant symptom. I had a bit of MCAS and a bit of dysautonomia, but I didn't have them badly. It was post-exertional malaise was the main thing.
Dysautonomia, you were encouraged by doctors when you were a little better.
That's a whole other phase, yeah. Yeah.
Is that about a year later?
So the timeline is September 20 or October 2020 or whatever it was, the decision around Tokyo was made.
Yeah.
I aggressively rested for a year. My energy envelope, as they call it, slowly but surely improved. And I was seeing doctors, they were scanning my heart, my lungs. There's nothing wrong with my heart and lungs. Like, it's great, I'm having these scans, but it was so clear to me they did not have any idea what was wrong with me. And so I stopped going to doctors because they just clearly didn't know what was wrong with me. But resting was working. September 2021, I turn a corner, second dose of the Pfizer vaccine. I'm like very close to feeling quite close to myself, but I can still feel the risk of PEM is there. I take the second dose of the vaccine and my body turns a corner, and PM...
Positive corner.
Just feel it intuitively. PM is not a risk anymore. And I start training again, and I start very slow return to training, 3 days a week, just biking, slowly but surely building up each week, a little bit more. And what became obvious, I still had a bit of dysautonomia. And it was mild POTS, but the main issues that it was causing was I would get these like sympathetic flares when I'd reached a kind of threshold of activity in a week. So I used to rest on a Sunday, that would be my rest day. And if I pushed that week a bit too hard, I would get a sympathetic flare. And that would be, gut symptoms, hot flushes, feeling very fight and flighty. I went to the doctors and they were like, yep, you have dysautonomia. It will go away with exercise.
Yeah, because
right?
that's the tried and trusted method.
Advice, right? And what happened was, as I got fitter, my threshold for those sympathetic flares did increase, right? I was able to do 4 sessions in a week, 5 sessions in a week. And so the doctors seemed to be right. It was so different from PEM, which was so clearly not a fitness thing. Whereas with my dysautonomia, it was quite clear that as my capacity increased, when my dysautonomia flare was increasing. Does that make sense? Hopefully I've conveyed that. And so I thought, okay, the doctors are right. Like, I can train out of this. A year, I go back to my old club. I race at like Henley Royal Regatta, which is quite a famous race. Like, it's a proper, like, I was doing 12, 13 sessions a week.
How close were you to your old levels at that point?
I would say about 75%. Like, I was still a decent way off. I pulled a 6:48 and my PB was 6:37.
You're not holding the boat up.
That's a decent score. That's a score that the GB rowing team would be interested in. The thing that I'd lost was this baseline resilience. You can go fast on over 7 minutes, but being able to tolerate a big training load, I'd lost that. And I still had quite a way to go, but I was getting there. And I was making really quick progress because your body remembers. Summer 2022, my funding is up for renewal, and I'm really conscious of Paris 2024. I've been out of the rowing team for 2.5 years at this point. My resilience is running low, and I've been so focused on doing everything right. Also, the other big thing that was getting in the way was I was on citalopram. Not for depression, it's an antidepressant, SSRI. In sport medicine, people who get overtraining, one thing they have found that works to help people recover, overtraining is when you've trained too hard for too long a time and you get into a big hole. It's not a million miles from post-viral fatigue, but it is different. They give people citalopram and it can help speed up recovery. This is something that we did in the team. And so I was given that, and I don't think it helped me that much, but I also think people thought that maybe my mental health could do with it as well. So I stayed on it. And then I wanted to come off it. And I was very slowly tapering. Looking back, and I can't really believe it happened, but I still had dysautonomia. I was coming off the citalopram and I was rejoining the GB rowing team. And my funding was up for renewal, so the pressure's on. Basically, my sympathetic system was just in absolute massive flare, just never came out of it. And I was just getting really, really unwell. And the doctors were trying to treat it with medication. I was seeing doctors and they were giving me pyridostigmine, which is for your gut, and antihistamines. And so the support system I'd built in the GB rowing team, I was working with this physiologist who I really trusted. He wasn't telling me to stop. And I look back at that time and I knew I was in a bad way, but I was in total denial. I couldn't accept that after 2.5 years of trying to get back. I knew if I had to stop, it was all over. I knew rowing was done. And I couldn't accept that I was still sick. I wanted to believe the doctors. I wanted to believe the people around me that I could keep going. And I was so focused on getting faster because I was like rejoining the GB rowing team and I was rejoining all the team members. I was like, oh my God, I'm slow again. And that was when my focus was on. It wasn't on, I'm actually still sick. And I went into shock, went into numb mode. And what actually ended up happening was I went back to my old coach who, this is a good example of where sport is good, is that he didn't need a doctor's report. He didn't need an expert to tell him what was wrong with me. He was like, you need to rest. Just listen to as I described how I was feeling. And he was like, you're clearly unwell. You need to stop. And I just remember feeling so much relief that someone had given me the permission to stop. And I stopped and then very quickly had realised I was very unwell and retired.
I just want to unpack the emotional side of it.
Yeah.
Tell me about the journey your emotions went on through that period and through the point at which you were still hanging on to the tiniest thread of this thing that used to be me, this identity that defined me, this thing that I pursued at the expense of all else, and you're still hanging on to it, and then getting to the point where actually you have to...
Looking back, it is a bit of a blur, but I think I was in denial. I was in denial. And I think one of the things with chronic illness is that nobody around you really knows what's going on. So you have to advocate for yourself incredibly strongly. That's one of the big challenges with chronic illness, is that you have to have so much self-conviction that you know what to do and that you're going to make the right decisions, because the doctors don't. We know, same old story.
Also, you don't want it to be true. So you have a habit of overriding that.
Yes, exactly. And I think it would have been incredibly easy for me to have gone back earlier, not have looked after myself as well as I did. But I just was so exhausted at coping and making all of those decisions by myself that I honestly think I had decision fatigue and I do think the citalopram had a big impact as well, in the sense that your strength of will to change course is mental, but it's also physical. And I didn't have any strength of will left. I think the citalopram coming off that drained that off me, and also being incredibly unwell again. The path of least resistance was to keep going. Everyone around me was encouraging me to keep going. So the path of least resistance was actually just to keep doing that. I remember just feeling like I didn't have the strength to go to my coaches and say, I can't keep going. I didn't want to disappoint them. And I also didn't want to process that my rowing career was over after all of this time I'd spent climbing a mountain, and you can see the peak. It cannot be over. I just couldn't process that. But then actually, by the time I spoke to my old coach, I was so relieved, because I was really unwell by that point. And so I actually wanted to stop. And I very quickly realised that I was super unwell and I couldn't go back. And so actually the decision around retiring was really quite easy when I got to it.
But you needed permission.
I needed permission.
I feel like there's something in here which all of us have had as long haulers, which is the 5 stages of grief.
Yeah.
Of, denial, bargaining, anger, acceptance at the end, but definitely got some denial, anger. But yes, there we go, right. But it feels like your journey through that was to some degree shaped by this recovery and having this goal and having this framework of doctors around you, who some of them were giving you good advice, some of them maybe not.
Yes.
Maybe people who haven't been within that structure of sporting excellence have found our own way through that.
I can't explain my emotional journey without explaining what different things were happening at that time, because it was very much dictated. And that's true for lots of other people too. But it was so related to the sporting journey, and where I was in the system.
There's that sort of that 5 stages of grief. Surely it starts all over again at the point at which you realise that goal that you've had for so long is now something you have to walk away from. And this is, again, something that all of us have had in long COVID, which is our old life and our new life. And there are certain things in our old life which are gone and they're probably not coming back. And we have to grieve those and work out who we are now. So what was that process like for you when you have a goal that was so close and so bright and shiny? How have you managed to walk away from that point until now? Yeah,
good question. I think there's 2 main things: support system and doing a lot of work around emotionally processing stuff. So the first one, this thing around identity, and is very linked with my support system, I think. I'm really lucky. My family are great. And they are really good at walking this line between, they're very supportive, and they would have been incredibly proud if I'd gone to the Olympics. My dream, so it was their dream. But they're also like the first to crack a joke at my expense. And they're very grounded and never let anyone get too big for their food.
Right.
And so sure, not going to the Olympics is really tough, but I'm still Oonagh.
That's the thing, because
it's not my identity.
Because they don't
yes.
put that badge of the Olympics
yes.
and that athletic prowess
yes.
as your identity, because
yes.
they just know you as Oonagh.
And everything just keeps going as normal. And you keep putting one foot in front of the other, and as it should be. And they're right. I'm doing something else now and I'm really happy. They knew that I'd be able to do that. And like having that foundation of support, I think, means that I don't think I ever actually fully identified with being a rower. I got my value from somewhere else, basically. And I loved it. And I think it was only part of my identity, but like the deep down, the core stuff wasn't rowing or the Olympics.
Do you miss it?
Rowing? Yes, I definitely do miss it. But there was good and bad bits, and there's good and bad bits of my life now. I don't see it as like, oh, I'm glad I'm not doing that anymore, or I really wish I was doing that. Life keeps going and you make the best of what you have in front of you. And when you're rowing, it's very all-consuming, and the sacrifices, as they call it, the things that you give up, are seen as totally justified. It's all worth it. You win that Olympic gold medal, it's definitely worth it. But you're not a good friend. You miss out on birthdays, you miss out on weddings, you don't spend time with your family. And that's
sounds like long COVID.
I've actually heard you talking before about the difference there, because it's almost with the rowing, you could justify it. It's like, guys, I'm training for the Olympics. I can't see you. I can't.
And people understand it, perhaps,
and people
at some
understand
level.
it. Yes. But when people are like, why can't you come on? You can come out.
Yeah.
You struggled with that much more in terms of people wanting to see you, or you wanting to fulfill social obligations, and having the illness as a reason not to, rather than having the rowing.
Yeah, it's much harder. Yeah. I do think that stuff is really important. That's one of the hardest things about chronic illness, is you lose that stuff. I think not rowing and having that stuff, I really value that stuff. And also there's other bits of my personality that I had to kind of shut off when I was rowing. I love comms. I love politics. And I had to put a lid on all of that stuff.
Of your interests outside.
Yes, exactly. And so I'm so grateful for rowing. And I loved it, but also really like my life now, which I'm really grateful for. So I don't know whether I want to finish that question about how did I process.
Yeah, that was just going to say, take a couple of steps back. What were the tools or strategies that you employed to try and process the grief or get to an understanding of what you'd been through?
You guys have talked about this on the podcast. I don't think we talk enough about how important it is to process your emotions. It doesn't happen automatically. And we are emotional beings. And what I've really found is that we're actually way more resilient than we think we are. And actually, if we can turn towards our emotions, it's an ongoing process, but it depends, different people will do it differently. But that kind of metaphor of emotions are like balloons underwater. If you push them down, they pop back up, and it's really hard work.
Very much.
Sweep under the rug, like what's under the rug.
Very British.
And so what I found, I remember quite vividly when the decision around Tokyo was made, I remember thinking, how am I going to cope with this intensity of this emotion? I was having panic attacks and I broke down in the supermarket. This is the most middle class story ever.
Was it Waitrose?
Waitrose. Darling, we've all cried in Waitrose.
Just to convey like how close the emotions were to the surface. The intensity of the emotion was really intense, right? How am I going to cope with all of this emotion? And I'm sure you guys can understand that. I feel my emotions very strongly. They're very close to the surface. I can't.
I'm the same.
I feel like maybe Jez is not.
I'm going to tell a little story, but I want Oonagh to finish first.
Yeah, so I really had no choice, but I was like, I'm going to have to do something about these emotions. So my process is turning towards them and being curious about them and trying to approach them with curiosity and compassion. And what I have found is that often it's this kind of weird thing, like the emotion's overwhelming, but you actually haven't fully understood it. So if you turn towards it, so like grief was a big one for me. And why am I feeling grief? Because I've lost rowing, which I really loved. Like that grief represents love. And that makes sense. I understand that. And that's by understanding what I was experiencing and realizing it was because I was fortunate to have experienced that rowing. It doesn't make the emotion go away, but it gives you a new perspective on it. And over time, and then also just being compassionate with yourself. Like, I'm having a really bad day today. The emotion's very strong. I need to be really kind to myself. My sister's really good about this. She's like, you need to be kind. She's quite firm with me, She tells me, you've been through a lot. And having that discipline and really making space for chronic illness is so hard. Just really giving yourself space to be kind to yourself and give that space.
Give yourself permission to be kind to yourself the way you're kind to other people.
Exactly. And I found that what at first I thought was going to be unmanageable, that actually you can carry these emotions around and they do get smaller over time. And by processing them and understanding them, you start to, instead of them directing you and leading you, if you don't process the emotions will dictate how you make decisions going forward. And if you process your emotions, you can come to life more with yourself rather than just with your negative emotions.
But the negative and positive, I think, is something big in that, because it's trying to always put them into grief is very negative. No, it's not. Look at it as something that's so beautiful because it comes from love.
Yeah.
So if we stop completely splitting these between positive things and negative things and sort of sit with them.
Yes.
Sit in that discomfort.
Sit in the discomfort, yeah. I totally agree. I definitely had this. We see negative emotions as kind of like some way like a failure.
Yeah.
No, it's part of life.
Even the anger.
Yes, even the anger. Anger often comes from a
Well, even
good place.
calling them negative emotions is part of the problem.
Yes, yes, exactly. I totally agree. And I am feeling this emotion because that thing, if you go for stuff, like you risk losing it. And would you have preferred to not have gone for it? No. And life, it has its ups and downs. There's a ton that's out of your control, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't have gone for the rowing. And so I think I'm fortunate. I think I'm quite accepting. I don't really know where that comes from. Maybe it is from my family. The rowing hasn't worked out. I'm really glad I've experienced it. I'm feeling a lot of grief. I'm going to carry this grief, but I'm also going to move forward with my life and make decisions that I've built something that I like again. And so that emotion over time, and it's not a finished process. I still have to do that. There's still days when it's hard. And I still think I haven't totally processed the loss of rowing. And I still find it hard to go to boat clubs and stuff. That's a tell if I'm still finding that hard. So I'm not, this is far from perfect process or far from finished. It's over time, it works. It's worked for me, yeah.
And it's getting marginally easier.
Yes, it gets marginally easier over time.
So just on the emotions and griefs, first of all, I want to say how happy it makes me to hear that you've come out of that space of illness to be a place where you do feel like you can grasp life again with both hands. Maybe it's not the same stuff you were trying to grasp before, but the fact that you can still throw yourself into life is incredible.
Thank you.
My story is just about coming here. So we're recording this in Shoreditch. I left Willesden Green, took about 50 minutes in the back of an Uber. And as I sat there in the back of the Uber, I was going through parts of town, Holloway Road, Highbury and Islington, Old Street, that I haven't been through in years, since my old life. And I was looking at places and going, I had a mad night out there. I went out on a date there. That was fun. Or, this is where I used to stop for fuel and to get drinks before we went to football on the way to Lebanon Side Sunday morning football. And I realised I was about to start crying in the back of the cab. And I was like, oh, God. Like, just being back to all of these places, I feel like Patrick Swayze in Ghost, right? I feel like...
We couldn't have an episode without a movie reference.
It's always going to be there somewhere. But honestly, it's like the old me died, but I'm still here.
Yeah.
And I'm still looking at all of these places from my old life, and no one else can see me. No one else can see that the old me has died. And I'm just riding past silently in the cab with my earplugs in because I want to try and keep the stimulation down. And what that told me is that I'm still grieving that. I'm still grieving that old life because as much as there are some things that I can do now, all of those things I can't do. You know, I can't go and have a mad night out. I can't go and play Sunday League football. I can't go out and socialise in an evening. A really good friend of mine had his birthday the other night, but because I went to go and see my dad during the day, there was no chance of me going across to see him that evening. It's this, how do you reframe your life and manage all of those feelings around it and still try and be grateful that you had what you did have without feeling so sad about the loss of them that it's overwhelming. And sometimes it is overwhelming. And when it is overwhelming, I try to let those tears come because, like you say, don't shove it under the rug, let that stuff out. And eventually, over time, that grief does get more manageable. But I'm clearly still in the process of it.
That's one of the things that's so hard about chronic illness is that the grief keeps going. You lose things every day. It's not like there was an event that happened and then you grieve it. The grief accumulates, doesn't it? And I think that's different from most griefs, is that every day you have to face what you don't have. I'm fortunate that I'm a lot more well, and so I don't face that as much as you do.
Yeah.
Your health is such that you still are dealing with loss every day in a much more intense way than I am.
Yeah, and I think for me, as I have incrementally been able to do some of those things more. I will never have those kind of nights out that I used to have, but I have managed to reform certain things in my life in a different shape. But there are certain things that I absolutely loved in my former life that I didn't know how I'd live without them, but it's just been a process of how you reform them.
Kind of have to reinvent yourself at some level. And there's a huge amount of emotional and mental and psychological dexterity required in that, because there's trapdoors all over the place, emotional trapdoors to fall into as you try and navigate that space. I think it's really hard.
Yeah, it is a complete reinvention. In terms of you and your career, you've completely had to pivot. I've completely changed what I do. There is no way that I could do what I used to do, I don't think, even now. But yeah, there's something to be said for finding those new, exciting, shiny objects and the different ways in which, and now I think I have a different form of cognitive exertion in my life that I find actually more fulfilling in some ways. And I think that sounds similar to you, because you can't use the same tools that you used in your former life, but now...
I'm using my brain more. But I think the thing that's really hard about chronic illness, I'm well enough that I can do that, right? But if you're so unwell that those things are not available to you, then it's a whole different circumstance. I'm astonished at the way that people find within the capacity they have the joy that they do. You know, I'm really grateful and I'm fortunate that I've made a recovery that means that I work full time. I can still see my friends and family. So I was able to find joy in different things. If I wasn't able to do that, I think I would be sitting here in a very different place right now. It's very easy for me to be, not easy, that's slightly doing myself a bit of a disservice, but it's much easier to emotionally process stuff when you can find joy in other things.
Well, so I think a lot of it boils down to purpose, right?
Yes, exactly.
To what degree is it possible for you to find purpose within the constraints you now find yourself?
Yes.
And depending on how severe your illness is, it's going to be increasingly difficult to try and get hold of a purpose that you can get your head around, because if you only have an hour of function a day and that's spent on the activities of basic living, then that's all you've got.
And I think that between the three of us, actually, we've each chosen to make our renewed purpose part of the thing that brought us down, if you will. As in, you've become a huge advocate for both the long COVID and the ME CFS community. You've written papers, you now work for Visible, and you're trying to make a difference. And Jez, you the same. You've made your purpose trying to help people to understand what on earth is going on with them. Whilst you and I particularly are not as sick anymore as other people, I like that we can take our experience and actually try to
give back a little bit.
Yeah, because actually all three of us got sick 6 years ago. And you had support from the medical professionals around you. But I don't think that any of the three of us had support from people who actually understood what we were going through. And so that's almost what we've made our mission to. What was your launching of your YouTube channel? Where did that stem from?
I was searching for control. And because this is a condition that strips all control away from you. You
and
can't
knowledge.
understand it. And knowledge. No one knows anything. And I found myself in the position where I could find some answers to some questions by virtue of the long COVID support groups and the way I was able to put surveys out and turn them around really fast. I could get an N of 2,000, turn it around within a week, bang, there you go, there's some science for you.
Have some information.
Admittedly, it's not going to get published in the Lancet, but it was still giving us answers that were replicated 18 months later by proper peer-reviewed papers, right? I found that out 18 months sooner. For me, I was just trying to wrestle this beast. At that point in time, I saw it as a bit of a battle between me and this beast of illness, and I wanted to win, and this was my way of fighting back at the time. I mean, arguably, I should have just been resting. But
how did you come to actually start working with long COVID support? How did you decide to make your mission something that is entrenched in the experience that you've gone through?
Yeah, interesting. I mean, it started off with the media interviews the first one I think was October 2020. Something I haven't sort of spoken about is my friend had ME before this. So when I got sick, I wasn't surprised that there was no healthcare or no help out there, which I think really shaped my experience too, because I think it's very traumatic when you're not getting better and you're not getting any healthcare and you don't expect it to be like that. So I was doing these interviews and I was realising, gosh, nobody knows that there's no healthcare for these conditions. And I realised also, oh my goodness, there's all this stigma around these conditions, and the fact that I'm an athlete is going against this narrative. And I hadn't realised that that was a thing. This just shows the kind of bubble I was in. You know, people long COVID were just like lazy or whatever.
Lazy, depressed, anxious.
Yes, exactly. And that it would get better quickly. And so I was like, I felt responsibility, I think. I've got to get my story out there. And I got a lot of messages back in those early 2 years of the pandemic of just thank you so much for making me not feel like I'm going crazy, basically. And I wasn't doing much at home, so I felt like the least I could do was just do these interviews. And then I got interested in comms. Like, I can convey information. I didn't realise that that was something I could do, and I enjoy doing this. And then also I think I got learned about the history and everything, and I was like got progressively more pissed off. Nice guidelines, graded exercise therapy.
Yeah,
it was
the injustice of it.
The injustice of it. And it was so jarring against my experience of being an athlete and rest being valued. I couldn't believe that doctors hadn't figured out that rest is good. Like, what?
Doctors or society.
Yes.
We live in a society that is so...
It's so anti-rest.
The emphasis is on being busy and everyone...
productive and achieving things. I could see that with my background, I was a good messenger for that. And so then it's like the same thing with rowing. I get invested. I get curious about how do we make progress. And I just kind of shifted from rowing into this space, basically. And comms are like advocacy. And I just was trying to learn more and trying to be in places where I could learn more about how do we make change. And I like learning stuff.
Learning stuff and then disseminating it.
And I realised I like comms and I like doing that. And I think we need better comms in this space. And so, the rest is history, really.
Since you've been working with various charities, you've been working a lot with different healthcare professionals, experts. Do you feel like we've had any shift?
I mean, I'd be interested to see what you guys think on this, but I do think progress has been made. It's just happening far too slowly for the people who are sick now. There is the MECFS delivery plan was a massive disappointment, but that is still a step forward. The government has talked about severe ME, right? Very severe ME. There are researchers who are doing work. We are very, very slowly making progress. And I think long COVID did give these conditions a credibility that they didn't have before. But there's still, it's so entrenched. The whole generation of doctors have been taught about graded exercise therapy. Undoing that is just such a hard problem to solve. And the rate of the research is just too slow for us to get the treatments that people need tomorrow, right?
Do you feel like we've broken out of our bubble at all in terms of actually reaching the wider society?
Not really.
Because we're so inside it.
I had a thought on this. So I was at end of last year, I went across to Brussels and spoke at a forum that was happening in the EU Parliament about long COVID. And this was the first, to my knowledge, first conversation on the subject at the EU Parliament about it. And the figures that are generally accepted now for long COVID are it affects between 3 and 6% of people who've had COVID. And most people have had COVID. So that's kind of 6% of most people. And what kind of staggered me was this is huge. 3 to 6% of the people in a country is a really huge number. What would that number have to be for it to be taken seriously?
3 to 6 is huge.
It's an astonishing number, yeah.
And the impact on healthcare systems and the actual GDP of
65 billion euros in salary lost in Germany alone. So there's just a random number just pulled out of it. And that's just salary, and that doesn't include the healthcare cost. It doesn't include the support cost, the social welfare costs. You'd think if a country is losing 65 billion euros of GDP, they'd throw maybe 1 billion at it. Maybe let's be wild, let's throw 2. But that doesn't seem to be happening because it's not politically expedient to do so.
Yeah.
Because by the time you threw that money in and got any answers, you're going to be well out of power.
But I think there's also something to be said for the fact that we're still, a lot of people are invisible to a degree because you can't get help, because it's not really something that's going through the healthcare systems still or the social care systems. people are being looked after by their loved ones. And, a huge thanks to everyone who is a carer of people with these conditions, because it's a huge burden for people to bear. So they're not reliant on the necessarily government support yet that down the line we might start seeing.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think other thing that I've thought quite a lot about is comparison to HIV and AIDS. And the order of magnitude was an order of magnitude less, right, in terms of numbers. It was so much fewer. But the thing that we need to consider is like organisational capacity, which is the gay community, because of their history, had really effective organisations. They had big organisations which had systems, they had funding, they could mobilise people that actually made HIV/AIDS in America. It made an election issue, even though far fewer people were affected than long COVID. Long COVID is a new illness and everyone is dispersed throughout the country. They don't know each other. They're not organised. We can't mobilise. And to mobilise people takes just resources, time, which people with long COVID don't have.
That's interesting, isn't it? That sense that it was, with HIV and AIDS, it was a community, whereas this is so scattered.
It's so scattered.
There's so many people, it's so scattered.
It still took 20 plus years, though, didn't it, to develop effective treatments?
Yes, but like that organisational capacity that gives you power, which the long COVID community does not have that power. We are really easy to ignore. And there's all these competing issues. Look at the news at the moment right now, right? The thing with making political progress is you have to put pressure on politicians. And they're not under pressure. They're not under pressure. They're under pressure from other things.
We've got huge work to try and develop. You've done a lot of work into actually what do we need to develop in terms of social sciences to actually help people, to support people. And as a society, we need to keep pushing to actually give people support, to help people, to believe people, to listen to people and to understand people, because we are still in a situation where the majority of doctors don't have any answers, don't have anything to offer for people with these conditions.
I totally think part of the reason these illnesses like ME and stuff hasn't been more progress being made is because the people who need most motivated to do something are least able to. And, the people who care don't have money and the people who don't care do have money. Yeah. 100% there's a structural obstacle.
But also you talked about that sense of community. It is a community that people want to support, want to come together and support each other. And that's not to say that our loved ones don't want to come together and support us. But actually, and if it's immediately facing you, you're doing so much work anyway just to care for that person that you don't have the capacity to go outside and be political.
Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Oonagh. Thank
you
you for sharing your story. And Jez, thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah.
We look forward to talking to you all next time. Thank you for listening to Make Visible. Please do like, follow, or subscribe to listen to our next episode, where we'll be uncovering more insights into complex chronic illness. This was brought to you by the team at Visible, a group of scientists and engineers whose lives have been affected by energy-limiting health conditions. We're building wearable technology that's helping 100,000 people measure and manage their complex chronic illness. To find out more about what we're working on and how Visible could help you, visit our website at makevisible.com.